Where can the horizon lie when a nation hides its organic mines in a cellar, dark and grim, famously very dim?
Pushing through the market square, so many mothers sighing. News had just come over, we had 5 years left to sign. News guy wept when he told us Earth was really dying. Cried so much his face was wet, then I knew he wasn't lying. I heard telephones, opera house, favorite melodies, saw toys and boys, electric irons and TVs. My brain hurt like a warehouse, it had no room to spare. Had to cram so many things to store everything in there. All the fat skinny people, all the tall short people, all the somebody people, all the nobody people. Never thought I'd meet so many people. The girl my age went off her head, hit some tiny children. If the black hadn't pulled her off, I think she would have killed them. And a soldier with a broken arm fixed his stare to the wheels of a Cadillac. Cop knelt and kissed the feet of a priest, and the queer threw up at the sight of that. And I think I saw you in an ice cream parlor, drinking milkshakes cold and low, smiling and waving, looking so fine. Don't think you knew you were in this song. And it was cold and it rained, so I felt like an actor. And I thought of more, I wanted to get back there. Your face, the way that you talk. I kiss you, you're beautiful, I want you to walk. We've got 5 years stuck on my eyes. 5 years, what a surprise. 5 years, my brain hurts a lot. 5 years, that's all we've got. We've got 5 years stuck on my eyes. 5 years, what a surprise. 5 years, my brain hurts a lot. 5 years, that's all we've got. We've got 5 years stuck on my eyes. 5 years, what a surprise. 5 years, my brain hurts a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, boys, girls, conspiratards, the king is dead. Bowie, as in his life, has set his death to music and words.
And here's an edit from the single Black Star. Do listen.
Something happened on the day he died. Spirit rose a meter and stepped aside. Somebody else took his place and bravely cried, I'm a black star, I'm a black star. How many times does an angel fall? How many people lie instead of talking tall? He trod on sacred ground, he cried loud into the crowd, I'm a black star, I'm a black star, I'm not against you. I can't answer why, just go with me. I'ma take you home, take your passport and shoes and your sedatives and booze. You're the flash in the pan, I'm the great I am. I'm a black star, way off my money, I've got game. I see right so wide, so open heart, it's pain. I want equals in my daydreams, diamonds in my eyes. I'm a black star, I'm a black star. Something happened on the day he died. Spirit rose a meter, then stepped aside. Somebody else took his place and bravely cried, I'm a black star, I'm a star, I'm a black star. I can't answer why, but I can tell you how. We were born upside down, born the wrong way round. I'm a
Welcome once again to another episode of the Pierrots and Fools Show with Mark Cocking. Did you have a good Christmas and solstice? I know that many in the burgeoning freedom movements are, disheartened by the commerciality of it all. Or perhaps they've grown their minds beyond the mind warp pavilion that is religion to realise that there's more to this life and reality that we've ever been permitted to realise, and that this applies to every field of knowledge, including that of the possibility or otherwise of a creator intelligence. You probably believe, for example, that the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere has the shortest day, but in fact you would be wrong. It actually has the most daylight hours, and I know you won't believe me because this goes against all that we've been taught to think, or think that we know. And it does. If you were to say that I'm wrong, it could only be because you believe, for example, that the Earth would have to turn 360 degrees for any given latitude to return to the same angle of inclination to the Sun from which it started. This makes sense in that it must be one full revolution of a sphere, being 360 degrees. But it actually has to rotate 361 degrees, very nearly, to return to that point. And this accumulation is progressive because the Sun itself and the solar system is in a spiraling freefall towards the centre of the galaxy. All is in motion, and this motion makes the law you have learned, even if only recently, not strictly valid. So when it comes to truths and facts, remain aware that they are not the same thing. A truth is perhaps a fact which has been made victim to some subjective perversions. Well, saying that, there's a thought. Truth, a subjective perversion of a fact. An interesting, debatable notion, to say the least. Yet, solstice is a time to reflect upon the images that we cast of ourselves into this mirror of reality, and to be with those that we love. It's also a time of great loneliness for so many, be it a physical separation, a psychological one, or a spiritual one. Perhaps those we love are no longer around, they've passed on, and times such as Christmas serve only as a reminder of that loss and an amplifier of the uncertainty that we all face in the knowledge that ultimately we are all alone in this reality. That's just a spiritual truism, not a philosophical perspective cast from the shadow of a lonely man, which I don't consider myself to be. We may be lucky enough to share our lives with friends, partners, family, and loved ones, and their love allows us to forget this ultimate solitude by degrees. Yet it remains at our core and influences our perspective. Many live their lives vicariously through other people, unable to function without the constant affirmations and reassurances that they are valued, that they are worthy. Others live a vicarious life by imposing their will or their mindset and their beliefs upon those dear to them and those who aren't. Yet this is no different from the former, in so far as they are still seeking reassurances for themselves. It's just that they choose to do it by bullying others into providing it, usually only because they can, sometimes without ever realizing it. It's not because they're strong. It's often quite the opposite. Meanwhile, it's often the case that the one soul that every individual spends their entire lives with, that's their own, doesn't get a look in. It becomes frayed because we don't understand the world, and we take solace in the fact that nobody else seems to either. So it's still scary, but much more comfortable if our uncertainties and doubts are placated by our fellow men and women. We want to know everything about everybody else, often believing that this is equal to caring for them. Especially when we tell them that we care because we take an interest, but we often know very little about ourselves, though we spend many years pretending that we do, only to realize that it's just a patchwork quilt that we've made It's been based upon the patterns we see in others, which we felt are worthy of adoption in some way. If we want to be like them, that is. But do we? There are those who live their lives vicariously by worshipping or following heroes. It's often been said of me that my hero being David Bowie, that I worship him. That couldn't be further from the truth. And it's a patronizing response of the ignorant, but you hear it all around you. I've alluded and spoken openly about David Bowie and my belief that he has great esoteric insight, to say the least, and that he puts this out there for his audience. This is why the death of David Bowie is going to affect people in a different way to the deaths of other stars. For the first time, quite literally, we have the impact of a death where each fan actually has their own perception. They realise what this bloke has done. He introduced them to writing, to history, to philosophy, to many, many things. More than you can say than Justin Bieber, I guess. But anyway, do we want to be like them? When the hard reality is that you are you, and that you have to be you in order to become you, is that a contradiction? No. It alludes to one of the great ironies in the Divine Comedy. That is, to become, you must first be. Then you can become. But there are many out there who tell you that you must lose your personal identity and kill your ego. Were it not for the fact that I've done the work to which they allude, I would never have spotted their ego-based deception, and may even have believed their bullshit. I'm weak, yet I admire those with strength. I observe their actions, hear their words, and thereby divine their intent and their application of this thing I admire, which is a contributor to their success, however one defines that. To the respect that they earn, to the reputation that they live up to, or otherwise. But I'm still weak. Merely observing these qualities in others doesn't lead me to their adoption in my scheme of things. I'd have to work at it. So how would I do that? Well, I noticed that my hero, my role model in this scenario, perhaps has confidence bred from knowledge and experience of his subject, and I realized that my knowledge was not so in-depth. The only solution would be more study or practice in that discipline. If I could do that, one day my knowledge would become equal, but that wouldn't mean that I had, for example, his confidence, only his knowledge. So I could take any and every opportunity to engage others and learn how to be more confident in what I say or do, even though internally I'm as nervous as I ever was. And this requires a certain degree of acting, I guess, a bit like biting your lip at something which you might have previously reacted emotionally to. You're acting. You're telling yourself it's all okay, calming down inside, and continuing to function as a result in the business or the personal interaction or the project that you were conducting. You are acting a role, not lying, but experiencing a different approach as a result of it. It's only after you've blagged your way through and retained confidence through, hopefully, some knowledge and a lot of lip biting that you realise that next time you're faced with a similar scenario, you've already succeeded once and it wasn't so bad. Each advance kind of builds confidence towards the realisation ultimately that you were daft for not just having had that confidence in the first place. Then you realise that you weren't daft. You probably had the confidence knocked out of you by others, and you may realise that this is the difference between you and the role model that you admire. You don't have to live your life vicariously, and to have a role model or a hero doesn't mean that you do. Some will, by definition. But they probably suffered the same, these heroes of ours. But they didn't concede to the weaker aspects and the impositions of others, where they considered it best not to. And they did consider all angles by direct, sometimes hard and brutal experience, hopefully winning through to some kind of personal victory. So, what about Black Star, and what about David Bowie in particular? Why have I strongly alluded to Bowie for the last few years, openly in public? Why have I been cryptic about it? Well, I was speaking only from my own insight and had no way of proving that Bowie was aware of the real condition that this world is in, the occult, hidden one I refer to, the spiritual realities that lay behind the everyday reality. I had stated to some that I believe him to be Illuminatus, and before the conspiratards and born-again Christians get too excited, do be clear, I don't mean Illuminati, not the popular baddies of the contemporary zeitgeist. I mean the exact opposite of that. With the release of Black Star, David confirmed much that I suspected and a whole lot more, and he set himself up for the derision of the ignorant and the stupid as he fulfilled the wish of so many of his fans, and, no doubt, his own wish. That is, to leave them with a final masterpiece. And it's on that basis that Mr. Jones, who always says nothing at all, said it all and produced a magnum opus of great occult significance, when combined with Lazarus, his stage play based upon The Man Who Fell to Earth. If you don't believe me, do a few minutes Googling and learn the alchemical art of creating a tornado. Some critics are claiming it's madness, others that it's genius. And Bowie was notoriously random and complex with his meanings, and would always say that the song means whatever you want it to. But not Black Star. Here is an initiated hermetic masterpiece, one which will leave any who have no insight of that subject, or into Bowie's life and work generally, quite mystified and seeing very little, other than the surface layers which are there to see. You'd expect me to jump on the bandwagon with this show and give my analysis of the song and the album, but I'm aware that this isn't of interest to everyone, and it's possibly even distasteful at this time of morning. So, it would be subject to so many variables anyway, that it could only be my opinion. I'm going to focus briefly on the less subjective elements, one of which is the occult symbolism and the encoding. Many people out there are condemning him for being a Satanist and Illuminati and, yes, you can count on it, reptilian. Oh, you know how they go. But I've got news for the paranoid Jesus camp and the Satanist hunting conspirators. Conspiratards. You're so far from the reality. One written down and performed for any to hear. Except those who can't and never will. They're excluded. They exclude themselves. They are correct about one thing, however, and that's only because David has laid it clearly before them. This is an occult philosophy woven around his own death. In the song, he refers to the villa of Orman, where the solitary candle burns. One will find a place by that name in Norway. It's the first thing you'll come across if you happen to Google Orman. Now in Norse, if you want to go the next step up from that, this means serpent, and it's obviously not coincidence. You're meant to work at understanding to attain it. Why should we do so, you might say? You don't have to. That's the point. In the villa of the serpent. So that's exactly the scene setter for you. This is an occult masterpiece which from that blatant introduction expands and grows. And if you think about it, this passion play will be seen and considered by more people than have ever even heard of Christianity, let alone practiced its perverse belief systems. The album name and artwork is a symbol, not the words. The 5-pointed star has always been a symbol of Venus because the pattern that Venus traces around the ecliptic of its 8-year cycle makes it appear 5 times in the morning sky and 5 times in the evening sky, a 5-pointed pattern. It's the only planet to draw a regular feature in this way, and this is one of the keys to occultism throughout the millennia. This figure is sometimes seen as a pentagram, and sometimes as a 5-pointed star, and sometimes as a 5-petaled flower, the rose. I'll let you decide which image Bowie is displaying on his album. As well as being a symbol of Venus, the pentagram is highly significant in geometry because, as Leonardo's math teacher Luca Pacioli revealed in his book on divine proportion, it embodies the golden proportion in every part of it. But there is more. This sacred geometry operates in time as well as in space. 5 Venus cycles of 584 days is 1.6 of a solar cycle, and 1.6 is the beginning of the golden proportion, 1.618, whatever. An irrational and magical number which prescribes the precipitation, try saying that when you're pissed, of mind into matter. In the ancient and secret doctrines, the planets and the stars mediate the precipitation of matter. This is pure natural science, natural philosophy. So when you hear someone decry the use of the word sacred geometry, you just need to understand that they only do so because they do not understand and would rather attract attention to that fact. Well, need I say more? The whole point of certain knowledge is that it is not accessible to the profane by very virtue of their profanity. Anyway, back to Black Star. It's going to cause consternation among the paranoid that Black Star, the logo that is, which is used on the album cover, is actually licensed and copywritten by NASA. Dang, dang, dang. No one's seen that yet, I don't think, but why would it not be? Lazarus, which appears on the album and, of course, is the forthcoming stage play, in occult doctrine, is far more than the man who was resurrected by Jesus Christ in the Gospels. First of all, risen from the dead is mystery school speak for a symbolic death and an initiation into the mysteries right through history. Jesus Christ did this to Lazarus. He initiated him into the mysteries, and the act was staged in public. This was a direct challenge to Rome. It was revolutionary because it signalled that the tie which bound the initiates to the ruling elite was being broken. It was the beginning of the end of the mystery schools, and it prepared the way for the secret societies. This 7-track, hermetically timed album finishes with a track called I Can't Give Everything Away. Now clearly that's a reference to the fact that he knew he was dying, but it, as ever, works on many levels. This guy has alluded to much. He can't tell you everything. He can't really tell you anything. But he can inspire you to look. And that's what has been unique about David Bowie. In the Black Star track itself, he tells you that he can't explain, but he can show you, just come with me. And he does all this while shaking. This shaking has got many folk perturbed, and we wonder what it represents. Well, as the great investigatory conspiracy theory world gets out there and has a look, it finds nothing. It can only be satanic. But it might help you to know that Bowie asked the actors to move as though they were Thunderbird puppets, the classic motion of the famous characters, and this should give you a clue to something more beyond the ravings of the uninitiated who merely claim that it's robotism, which of course has a place in the picture. I guess this might just have been done because Bowie admired Thunderbirds and saw that it had a resonance with the theme of the album and his life and death which is expressed here. This is art. I suggest it's Hermetic art. Similarly, the obscure language used in one song, apparently gibberish and meaningless and obviously satanic, is quite the opposite. It's both the language of the Droogs in A Clockwork Orange, part of the influence present in the Ziggy Stardust character, and it's the language of the New York gay underground which Bowie found himself plunged into as a result of going to the United States and meeting Andy Warhol. Sorry, it's not the devil's tongue, though I guess if you happen to be a good old-fashioned Christian American right-wing bigot, patriotic only to God, then I guess both those things represent the same thing to you anyway. The big reveal for any occultist or any who are interested in the secret doctrine is in Black Star when he sings "Something happened on the day he died. Spirit rose a meter." He then mentions that someone took his place. A spirit rose a meter is a phrase recognizable to initiates of certain orders, and this one refers to the mysteries of the Gospel of St. John, the most occult gospel in the Bible, you might say, originally penned by Mark. In here, you will find Prester John, that's Priest John Mark, and the Templar mythology, but I kind of digress there. The phrase is an identifier, as certainly as Beggar at the Door of Love identifies a Sufi mystic. It is, of course, just as plausible that Bowie is as well read in these subjects as many are, which is exactly my point. Beyond all else, though, this is a work of Hermetic art. It engages the real issues in ways which Bowie could deny if he wished, but he has no need to, because his death was woven into the synthesis, whilst at the same time teaching much of what he understands to be true to those who want to know. Watch what it's going to do. Watch what it already is doing. And I believe that as we look back to, say, the Enlightenment and the Renaissance periods, inspired by the occult revivals of those times, and admire their greatest art and writings and works, others will one day look back to Black Star and Bowie's body of work. Something was created, and it is an Antichrist. But that's where the Christians perceive with the eyes of the blind, so much so that the great masters of their own have warned them for centuries, but they can't see that they are their own Antichrist. It is all that they worship, and all which allows them to, their church and its fabrications. The music is sublime and at times disturbing. It's drum and bass, jazz and much else. It isn't rock and roll. That actually was the only set goal as described by Tony Visconti, the producer. This is not rock and roll, to which the word, this is genocide, springs to mind. But Bowie once said rock and roll is the devil's music and nothing would convince him otherwise. This, therefore, is a message to possibly Bowie's greatest ever work, and you might expect nothing less, would you? Oh, how the insane religious ones will howl over this album whilst missing its importance. Bowie's enormous import to our times completely. But enough said, really, for now. Rest in peace, Mr. Jones. You may have said nothing at all, but you did say it all. And wasn't that just like you? In another world, we would have had you as Prime Minister of these sad lands, and I don't doubt they would have been a better place. Less wasted, maybe. But that was never your part. You were the Pierrot, and you leave a lot of fools behind. But we do hear you as you rise again, Lazarus. Blessings and love to you, brother.
Look up here, I'm in heaven. I've got scars that can't be seen. I've got drama, can't be stolen. Everybody knows me now. Look up here, man, I'm in danger. I've got nothing left to lose. I'm so high it makes my brain whirl. Drop my cell phone down below. That just like me. By the time I got to New York, I was living like a king. Then I used up all my money
Now, interestingly, the only words which make it onto the actual album cover itself, be it vinyl or CD, are the following, and they're from Black Star, the track that I played first tonight, or an excerpt from that. It says, "How many times does an angel fall? How many people lie instead of talking tall?" It then goes on to say, "He cried aloud into the crowd. He trod on hallowed ground." I'll leave you to work out what he might be saying there, or why it's so important, just those few lines, to put on the album cover. But it's quite relevant to something that I want to talk about tonight anyway. And that is the BBC. You see, I was saddened this Christmas to be advised, third hand, that I'd apparently upset and offended one of my longest standing friends, a man whom I've always considered a brother and a fellow journeyman. Our stories go right back to our young teenage days and include some of the most memorable moments of what many would describe as halcyon years, when a very tight group of friends launched themselves individually into their chosen career and life paths, albeit some with soggy jeans, due to many a merry night, and a kind of ongoing challenge to piss down each other's trouser leg without being noticed for as long as possible. So, such news as this comes as a personal blow, insofar as I'm advised that I need to build bridges to a dear old friend who has apparently taken exception to something I posted on Facebook. But the soggy jeans have been long forgiven. This is something so offensive to him, apparently, and I should add his own brother, who is also a longer-standing, close personal friend of mine, that I'm advised they're unlikely to even reply were I to attempt to build that bridge. So, this is my attempt. It's relatively clear that exception has been taken to a posting about the BBC, which stated that Saturn has the biggest ring system in the solar system, and that the second biggest is probably the paedophile ring operating from within the BBC, or words to that effect. Just a reposting, actually. This, and no doubt other postings and or interactions that I've had with the BBC over the years, and opinions expressed about them, must have led to some offence. This, of course, would be a subject of interest to my friend and his wife being in BBC management. I can well imagine that it must have been embarrassing to work at the John exposure of Jimmy Savile, as the spotlight of publicity and moral judgment swung almost 180 degrees to shine so firmly upon them. I can imagine the internal memos and the word-of-mouth policy guidance being bounced around by many layers of BBC management to protect their own arses. This was even noticeably apparent with top celebrity figures like Esther Ranson and Childline. If she didn't know about Savile, with whom she worked, then she was probably the only one who didn't. This much has become apparent, even though Lydon, Johnny Rotten, was saying it in the 70s. And whereas I can appreciate that only the smallest percentage of celebs and BBC personnel actually had anything to do with such perversion, there is no excuse for the irresponsible and downright scandalous cover-up of what is known by the BBC. One can only presume that it's because of their involvements, and the reality seems to be that they go far deeper than has yet been revealed, certainly in public. And this is certainly what I've concluded for myself by reference to known and established facts, coupled with the behaviour of the BBC. My old friend is and always has been a good man, and that has never been questioned by me. I can only imagine that he feels there's some issue of implication on my part, that all the BBC staff are paedophile protectors or something similar, which is of course absurd. They are as much a victim of this criminal cabal as anyone, other than the real victims, of course. I've gone so far as to not maintain any direct contact, for simple reason that I've long been aware that I would compromise his position the moment I were to do so. One doesn't have to be a paranoid conspiracy theorist to see why that would be the case, in reality. There have, of course, been many occasions when I would have liked to have contacted him to ask for his opinion on certain events and matters, but I didn't. The BBC has shamefully let the people down. Its reporting is biased, it's incompetent, and it's corrupt, and it's provably so. Its editors have no real editorial control, making them overpaid and under-talented yes-men. Indeed, that is the calibre of most BBC personnel, except, of course, the technical and the artistic staff. Its sole purpose is to maintain the status quo of ignorance and indoctrination and to promote the illegitimate, criminal royal family whilst distracting the public's attention from what the leadership of the country are really doing. The quality of the news output is so poor that other nations laugh at us. Their investigative journalism is third-rate and never touches upon reality. Their presenters are automatons, and they patronise the viewer with their 12-year-old mentality. It seems their only role is to dumb people down and to indoctrinate them. Is this why you joined the BBC? To watch the arts and media abused as a propaganda tool and a weapon of a secret state? It could be said that I'm just some radical activist with a downer on the BBC, but let's see if that stands up to scrutiny. If I had been so radical, I would have long ago approached my friend and asked him questions, not least about the Cumbria shootings only a few years ago, when you were in charge of the region's radio output. The BBC either had to be completely ignorant of what really happened and was just repeating the official line, or it was complicit in covering up the facts arising from that terrible event. Or one can invent some middle ground to justify ineptitude. The same can be said with specific regard to the paedophile ring exposed within the BBC and the 7/7 London bombings. Selective distribution of information to the public, often made up or based on fictitious scenarios. Drop the dead donkey doesn't get a fucking look in. They do say that evil is permitted only when good men do nothing. Well, in these times, which we actually talked about and foresaw 30 years ago, my friend, doing nothing is not a credible option. Everybody has pensions and family and welfare to look after, but at what cost? Moreover, evil is permitted when good men do the opposite of nothing, that is, something, which bolsters the credibility of the official line, when in fact it is provable nonsense. Then, discrediting or ridiculing those who do investigate the facts. BBC is a propaganda organ for the criminally inane. It raises funds by imposing an unlawful and criminal taxation upon the people. Those who can't afford to pay it are hounded and bullied by third-party collectors, threatened in writing every month and treated as criminals. And those who choose not to watch TV because it's a tool for political and social control are equally treated as criminals until such time as they submit to letting some self-employed commission-earning retard into their home to check that they are not breaking the law. This is contrary to all decency as well as English law. And what do the BBC do with all that bullying money, which is billions each year? They pay themselves ridiculous salaries, present themselves with merit awards, award themselves bonuses and pensions, and yes, even a free TV fucking license. Yet, the victims of this scam are not even allowed to be angry at the management or attract attention to their negligence over social media. Well, the media has changed. But this is something I can empathise with, coming from a world of finance and mortgages, as I did, where life was much the same. Do as you're told or pay the price. I could see the scam. I could see its victims. I was part of that machine, and there's no tackling it from within, so, without ever knowing how I could or would do it, I felt compelled to remove myself and challenge it from without. Not because I'm noble, but rather because I was unhappy. And I was conscious of the real politic, which was occupying my own industry. The political takeover and financial big bang was destined to destroy all that we claim to hold dear, freedom and democracy, which is merely the imposed will of the majority upon the minority anyway, and even peace on our streets. I can reasonably conclude that you, being a deeply intelligent, artistic person, and researched, have concluded that the BBC is not subject to these same forces, and that nothing is going on to cause any moral issue sufficient to inspire you to challenge some of the lies from within, which others are having to expose from without. And I don't judge you or condemn you, for you have the right to be, do, and say whatever you wish. Well, perhaps outside of work, that is, provided the walls aren't listening or the boss is watching on Facebook. Just as I have the right to raise awareness against the great corruption in your corporation, and I never post it anywhere other than my own Facebook page. Not even those of friends, unless I know they happen to welcome it. Yet you choose offence? Why do I bother highlighting the BBC issue at all? Is it because I want folk held accountable for destroying the soul of the nation? Heck, no. I'm wise enough to know that, well, it's not going to happen, is it? Let's face it. It's because they haven't even begun to reveal the depths of this corruption, yet they are aware of it. It's the news story of the millennia, and this is the news media. But the BBC sit on it because their political masters, and I don't mean the government necessarily, require it. And because they are complicit in it, yet they claim independence and impartiality. All the good folk and the incredible artists within their corridors get tarnished by this same brush of impartiality when it all sums up to blatant social engineering and the turning of a blinded eye to reality. There is, of course, a high probability that many editors and executives in the BBC know nothing about some of the facts, even if they are news editors, political editors, financial editors, whatever, by virtue of their total incompetence and clear ignorance of their own subjects. But it's not possible, nor is it even plausible, that none of them are aware of the details. I can say this with confidence because the facts are there, and they're understood by many in government, some notable media figures also, the intelligence services, the civil service, the alternative media, the research communities, and even the public eye on YouTube. This is detailed in hours of proper investigative journalism, which puts the BBC to shame, not least by the likes of Richard D. Hall. If they were not aware of these facts, they should be fired without pensions for gross misconduct or for political activism. Because that's what they're doing, even if only by default. Willful corruption and a corporate blind eye. Yet you are offended by my output? There's a community of many hundreds of thousands of people in the UK alone who are grossly offended by this perverse corruption. The paedophile ring, based around celebrity suppliers, operated from within the BBC and royal circles. This much is even publicly known nowadays. I was bleating about it on Facebook and at our meetings over the years. Yet, I was seen as a conspiracy theorist, never quite crazy enough though to be disregarded, and always told how I make sense. Though some aspects are, of course, a bit too much to consider at first hearing. Well, I wasn't crazy, as you've seen over the years, nor am I now. You were seen as a journalist, and the jury's out on the meaning of that word nowadays, I guess. Saville and others supplied children and even babies to royal and occult elites for use in their paedophile and, yes, even sacrifice rituals. But I guess this is too crazy a reason for the disappearance of one child every 20 minutes in this country if you're a journalist. You're trained not to consider anything outside the comfort zone. And that's the zone where things may impact upon one's career. One of those being supplied with children was Prime Minister Ted Heath. There was certainly a morning cloud hanging over his yacht as the children, after the night before, were murdered and dumped overboard, weighted with rocks, so that they wouldn't be able to identify these famous faces. Heath, of course, is known in all informed circles nowadays to have been a German asset. The paedophile ring is used to compromise senior figures in all walks of life, but particularly government and media. It's also used for ritual sacrifice purposes. But again, I'm guessing your journalists must be aware of this, or at least be professional enough in their field to be able to show that this is all just a nonsense conspiracy theory with no factual foundations at all. But all we get is silence, and we know why, because many have done this research, and they were never paid to do it, nor do they get a comfortable pension. These qualified journalists within the BBC could perhaps come along and prove that Tony Blair was not a war criminal, or that Kenneth Clarke didn't bugger young boys, that Harriet Harman didn't support paedophiles. Oh, yeah, well, that one's been proven anyway, hasn't it? So you might just be aware of that one by now. They might prove that Sir Leon Britton, who obtained his knighthood because he knows the secret, was not a paedophile, or that our Queen Elizabeth is not an impostor who, together with Pope Ratzinger, has been charged and found guilty in absentia by the International Common Law Court, with an arrest warrant issued around the world for their part in abducting children from Canada, a highly documented case, but you're not allowed to mention it, even though it's reportable factual news with documented factual witnesses and case histories, every bit as valid as those uncovered in this country and so firmly linked to the BBC. And people like me are condemned for being anti-patriotic, for pointing out the level of corruption and the people it serves. Are journalists required to leave their minds at the door before they do what they do? Particularly those who would claim to be a public service. But what are you serving the public? Look around you. Is it a worthy plate, or is it the BBC falling so far short of its own stated purpose as to be noted as a criminal organisation by so many people around the world in all spheres of intellectual and everyday life? I guess anyone working for the BBC will be aware of the claims of Ben Fellows, who I'm sure you all know. He will give you any details you want, should you ever decide to let the public know what's going on about sexual abuse in the BBC. Or go and ask Bill Maloney, campaigner and long-term abuse victim of the system. Believe me, they can give you news stories and names and evidence to make your soul curl. It's there to be seen, but strangely, the mainstream media choose to ignore it, whilst bleating on about principles and family values, because those they represent have been caught out. This is the face of evil in many people's books, though you may see that opinion as just being a radical notion spouted by political extremists who have their own reasons to hate the BBC. But if you look, you will see that it's ordinary people of all kinds and persuasions, and they have had enough. I'm not suggesting that you personally could have done anything about it, or even that you should have tried. Maybe you even did. I'm not suggesting you have any moral issue. I know you to be an honourable, loving man with a good heart and mind. We even constructed reality games and wrote songs together. I've never approached you to question you, always assuming that you're on the right side of the moral dilemma you must be facing, as we all have our paths and roles to play in these times. And if you're not, then I'm always here as a friend to advise if I can and if you want, but it's never for me to impose. But the judgment that you cast upon me by your contempt at what is supposed to be taken without comment, I guess. I'm supposed to allow others in our circle of friends to believe that I've been offensive to you, yet you utter no words and rely upon others to express it. Well, I don't. If you attach yourself to the BBC in such a way as to believe that I could ever be referring to you when I rightfully condemn those who use your corporation for their own ends at our expense, then that is your problem in the grand scheme of things, not mine. You should be more intelligent than to do that. Part of the political reality is, ironically, the takedown and the removal of the BBC. Charter renewal, for example. It will become a patsy for the terrible misdeeds of those who will continue with their circle making long after its demise. The public will have been placated long enough by the exposure and the prosecution of a few low-level players. Another part of the reality is that the pensions for which so many have compromised their peace of mind will be taken away, its value eroded with the currency underpinning it, or the rights removed by public protest maybe at the use of their money. And no doubt that won't be fair even though they've been funded by taxing the people, whilst operating under a charter which was broken years ago, the moment the BBC accepted foreign funding, that of the EU, to promote globalism, Zionism, and expansion of occulted elitist rule through a criminal and unlawful debt-based monetary system. A scam which the BBC, together with others, obfuscate with intent for reasons which should be becoming apparent to you. Albeit far too late for someone who knew about this stuff decades ago, I must add. One could have discovered an intellectual, moral, academic, or professional justification for deciding that it's all conspiracy theory or political nonsense and best ignored. That would be an honourable perspective to hold, and the subject of an interesting media debate in itself, one which might allow others to become aware of the realities and to judge for themselves. Or, had any of my comments upset you personally, I'd have hoped for a personal heads-up and the opportunity to regret and apologise for any unjustified offence, something which I actually work to avoid. It's always a trade-off between upsetting people and waking them up to ask questions of those who have our trust to report the truth. You, as a journalist, know this one, so I apologise for any personal offence you may have taken, and I do regret it. You didn't have to put yourself in between me and your employer in response to it, though, and you are therefore welcome to indulge yourself in whatever offence you've perceived, because it is perceived, not received. A gun massacre occurred in Cumbria, yet the BBC so misreported the facts as to leave themselves wide open to charges of direct complicity in a crime potentially involving the water authorities and the terrible flooding the region has been and still is being subjected to, and a whole lot more too. Charges which they avoid responding to at all costs, for simple reason that the facts are there to be seen and weren't reported by the BBC. And when they're compared to the supposed facts pumped into the population by the BBC, even a child can see that there's been no news reporting, no journalism, just incompetence at best. Though complicity by the BBC leadership in a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice would appear a more likely assessment by any reasonably minded person. The fact that most can't comprehend why that would be done does not detract from the fact that it has been, or that at least there is a credible investigation to be done. And I won't even begin to go into the fracking debate and the BBC's bias and downright criminal disregard for the communities they claim to serve in Manchester and Cumbria by not reporting the truth about fracking and merely becoming the tool of a Prime Minister bent on getting his cronies even richer, when one even looks at the evidence against the industry. The very least one would expect to see would be a series of resignations, with heads held low for gross incompetence in the field of journalism, but we see none of that. Rather, we get attacked, or criticised, or lumped in with lunatics, or others express their offence. Well, get over yourself. It's a strange world, and we live in strange times. Integrity to a long-established principle can act as a rudder in tough waters, and yes, those waters can often lead to a solitary shore for anyone who seeks an end to the global elite control and the enslavement and social engineering of the population for the benefit of a few. As we see our friends sail past, some even hurling rocks of contempt, it's sad and it does hurt. Of course it does. The solitary shore gives a really good view of the precipitous waterfall just around the bend, though. Can't you hear it yet? This isn't a tirade against you, my friend. Rather, it's an apology for offending you. One which is tainted by the knowledge that you would never be able to apologise to me for the offence you've caused me by taking personal offence in the first place, or by anything else I've highlighted regarding the BBC. And believe me, there is so much more. I would have thought that you had far bigger and better things to be offended by, rather than your daft interpretation of what I might think. The times, they are a-changing, and the changing isn't free. We've read it in the papers, and the tracks are on TV. Beware the savage jaw of 1984, my friend.
Calm down, dear. This is only a podcast.
Here's Rich.
With my best Michael Winner impression. All right. We're coming up to the 20th anniversary of the Vagina incident in Brazil.
The what?
The Vagina.
The vagina incident.
Vagina. I'm not sure if I'm saying it properly. I think it's pronounced Vagina. Yeah.
Vagina incident.
Yeah. So we're coming up to the 20th anniversary on the 20th of January. It happened in 1996, and a craft came down, and apparently some aliens were caught. And if you want to hear more, switch to Ben Emlyn Jones's show. Not now. And
Hello,
you'll hear the whole interview on that. But just to make you aware, have a read about it, because it's one of the great Earth mysteries out there. And what's strange about it is all the muddle up out there about the whole thing, because by 1996 the disinformation machine's in full effect, and you can see that if you have a read through the case. But it's a very interesting one.
I'll have a look at that. And today, through the round window?
Now, today I'm going through the triangle window.
Oh, yeah.
No, actually, I'm going through the lightning flash window to pay homage to David Bowie, who sadly passed away. And can I just say, ashes to ashes and funk to funky, if nobody said it already.
Yeah.
Just on a lighter note, and to point out something very, very cheery indeed, a song called My Death.
Yes, a big influence to David Bowie was Jacques Brel, so this is my tribute to David Bowie.
My death waits like an old roué, so confident I'll go his way. Whistle to him and the passing time. My death waits like a Bible truth at the funeral of my youth. Weep loud for that and the passing time. My death waits like a witch at night, as surely as our love is bright. Let's not think about the passing time, but whatever lies behind the door, there is nothing much to do. Angel or devil, I don't care. For in front of that door, there is you. My death waits like a beggar blind who sees the world through an unlit mind. I'll throw him a dime for the passing time. My death waits there between your thighs. See how your cold fingers close my eyes. Let's not think of that and the passing time. My death waits there to allow my friends just a few good times before it ends. So let's drink to that and the passing time. But whatever lies behind the door, there is nothing much to do. No, angel or devil, I don't care. For in front of that door, there is you, and my death waits there among the leaves. Up magicians' mysterious sleeves, rabbits and doves, and the passing time. My death waits there among the flowers, oh, where the blackest shadow cowers. So let's pick lilacs for the passing time. My death waits there in a double bed, sails of oblivion at my head. So let's pull the sheets against the passing time. But whatever lies behind the door, there is nothing much to do. No, angel or devil, I don't care. For in front of that door, there is you.
In my song Pierrots and Fools, there's a line which says, "The secret is to realise you have a mind to find," and I've used it in this show for this reason. It surprised me how so few words have, over the last few years in particular, brought me derision when I quote it. And this would be because I guess inherent in it is the suggestion that I have a mind and that I'm saying to others that perhaps they don't, but really should look for one. And I've said it within a community which is party not only to some of the greatest minds in the country, but is also subject to, well, the inertial mass, shall we say, of some of the most feeble. But this is not spiritual, intellectual arrogance or vanity, quite the opposite. Because from my perspective, what the detractors say merely highlights their own personal issues, which they are usually all too keen to divulge to you, because that really is the only reason they're preaching in the first place, their own hubris. Indeed, that in itself is a truism for us all. We are what we say and do. If we aren't, others see the gap between words and actions and judge accordingly. If your ego can't keep up with the fact that you are full of unresearched opinions and unhealthy shit, that's when the problems occur, and you start telling everyone they're stupid, or a shill, the one word which really singles out the real cockheads in our movement. Why? Because we're all subject to counterintelligence operations, and that word shouldn't really be used and devalued by overuse from moronic and retarded mindsets, the conspiratards. There is a consistent need on the part of many to not only love but also to hate, to not only cleanse but also to foul. Anything is better than nothing, just so long as they obtain the attention and feel the hubris which being different brings them, never quite realizing that they are not different. Because in many ways they're worse than the homogenized masses who at least get on with their daily programmed lives and continue to function. So the line merely highlights the obvious fact that we all have a mind to find, whether it be an opinion about a particular subject or whether it be the discovery of that which we could call self. Hence, the secret to having a mind of your own is to know that you have one to find. How you then find it is up to the individual. But until you know you have one, and that it is in fact the most incredible thing in the universe, and is well worth looking for, it is in fact the subject of an ancient secret encoded within the Bible and the Tarot. It is the subject of occult science and alchemy, and is, if you think about it, the only thing you have to work with anyway. Why would you go look for it? especially as there are so many others around us all the time telling us how right they are and how wrong you are, and even judging us morally and spiritually as though they sit on some higher perch in a pecking order. But you are used to being pecked, aren't you? Though you're tired of it. Were you ever bullied at school or at work? Anywhere? Did you ever ask the bully why they are bullying you? To which their answer has to be something vacuous. So vacuous you could show them up as the ignorant pig. But then, of course, they kick your head in anyway. And that was always going to be the case. You lost nothing much by asking, and gained a whole lot if you asked it well, with some dignity and strength. So the asking of the question to oneself is the secret to finding the mind. The asking of the question is indeed key to all reality, and I'll repeat that many times, I'm sure, before I can make it clear why that is not only a truism, but also a necessary understanding by which the enslaved can free ourselves from the enslaver, be it on a personal level or a national and global one, I would suggest. The asking of the question is a fundamental aspect of occult history, and understood within many mystery schools from the perspective of master and student, and the dissemination of knowledge whilst restricting it from those who would abuse it. It would be no use a student going to a master and asking, for example, what are the prime factors of 14? The master would not answer, as the student hadn't given any indication that she might understand the answer. So the student's key ability is highlighted in the question itself in order to unlock the answer. Something like, I know that prime numbers are indivisible by any number other than 1 and itself, and that clearly there are 4 of them, that's 2, 7, 11 and 13, which occur prior to 14. I can see that out of those numbers I can make 14 only by using 2 and 7. So, is this what's meant by prime factors? Those primes which multiply together to create the number in question. To which a master might reply, yes, exactly, almost. What you need to understand beyond that is this. And then he'd go on to explain why they must be squared thereafter. But by asking the question correctly, the student has allowed the master to hone the information to the understanding of the student and to take them to the next level of understanding. A wise student could ultimately learn to ask only the questions to which they'd already worked out the answer, making questions rhetorical and confirmative only, and the flow of information almost superconducted. That student may then even become a master on the back of that realization. But to ask a question which requires that you are told everything, without even being bothered to hone your understanding to a basic level, is actually an insult to those who do hold that understanding. And even then, that's only because they know that the process requires that effort, and that anyone who wants the shortcut is simply not going to contribute anything positive. The teacher can't give everything away. They never have and never can. By this understanding, they remove spiritual and intellectual laziness from the student. In Grail law, a knight is given opportunities to see and recognize the Grail, though he or she may not realize it. He'll never be granted more than 3 opportunities to recognize that Grail and to ask the question. This is because if he's not able to recognize what is before him, he could never recognize that which is within and wouldn't be worthy of the knowledge anyway. So, no matter how wise or knowledgeable one might think he is, he will be judged only upon his ability to ask the question when the opportunity presents itself by the grace of good fortune and disciplined learning. If unable to do so, regardless of reason, he is passed by, as he was not spiritually ready. Many are called, not many answer. That is what is known about the Grail. Or so I believed when I found myself in a strange scenario years ago, which seemed to present an opportunity for me to ask a question. I actually believed that if I did, those to whom I was asking it would just look bemused and wonder what the heck I was wittering about. Just another lonesome Grail seeker like a Trekkie lost at a Star Wars convention. But it seemed amusing and timely enough to slip it in and monitor the response. It had, after all, been on my mind for weeks at that time, and I didn't know why, so I asked, "Whom does the Grail serve?" And that's a story for another time, but suffice to say that I received an answer and became aware of a whole lot more as a result of asking the question, in apparently the right way, and what appeared to be the right time and opportunity. Nobody could have been more surprised than I was, yet with hindsight, I realised I'd played a serious role. Feeling stupid for playing it, but having a reason to do so, I braved it through. Looked like I was confident, and asked an informed question, whilst being ready to be misunderstood or ignored without taking any offence, and certainly not offering any. The worst that could have happened was that I'd have to excuse my stupidity by laughing and, well, saying sorry. I thought it was at a Monty Python Grail convention, or whatever. In the last 3 shows, I've raised some questions and given some references and insights which I suggest would be of value to anyone who's looking to understand. This is always with the proviso that this is my understanding and that you are welcome to your own. I've found that most people, even truth seekers, don't really want to know much. They want certainty, not knowledge, like earthlings on fire. But I see knowledge as certainty and certainty as fluid. So I have no internal pressure to be proven correct or embarrassment if proven incorrect. What I'm pointing out to you is nothing more than you could and should find for yourself, but I'm aware that it runs counter to much that has been said in conspiracy world, and that what is said in conspiracy world sets the bar for the understanding of those who can't or won't think for themselves. There's a battle for your mind out there in this virtual reality. Rather than telling you what to fill it with, well, I've crashed a projectile into your cranium to see if it reverberates for a while, and I've left you to draw your own conclusions. There's been 3 key subjects. Broadly, the hidden history of Britain in particular, but with the world as a whole, and numbers and occult sciences, the origins and knowledge of the pyramids and the megalith builders. And these have been woven together by exploring the ancient mythologies and the books of the Abrahamic religions and their potential falsification throughout history, touching upon why and how this has been done. This 4th episode can be considered as a 4th pillar. If you can imagine 4 pillars in a line, you can also picture the 3 spaces they contain or encompass between them. And that's how the subjects have been tackled intentionally, and I'm aware it appears fragmentary. It couldn't be any other way. What is in doubt is whether I can bring them together for a novice to these subjects in an understandable way, whilst maintaining the integrity of the information actually targeted at listeners who are not novices, from the interested to the initiated. So I've constructed it hermetically around a triple octave, and this is the same as the Kabbalistic tree of life, if you prefer, or the tarot. After all, it's the only evolutionary process in nature, so it's worth trying. And it took me nearly 40 years to understand it, if that's the right word. So I'm aware that we're going up the hill backwards, but it'll be all right. We've seen that there's a whole hidden history so far removed from that which we've been indoctrinated with that it takes perception beyond the normal daily consciousness to engage it and to see it for what it is, an intentional, elaborate lie driven by occult psychological manipulation, media, propaganda, war, politics and violence. But this is where any truth seeker runs into a problem, because it's at this point they need to realize that the language they use has suddenly become in-the-box political idealism. After all, what right-thinking person isn't already aware that this is the way the world is? It simply just is. What we don't like to believe, though, is that this is the way it's meant to be. And whereas it may be true that our reality is the net effect of how it is perceived by all the minds on earth, this does not mean that some grand spiritual solution is found in proclaiming this as a spiritual or philosophical truism, which, if only everyone would understand, the world would change and the evil would be gone. The problem being, however, it can't be anything more than part of the solution and can never be the solution, for the simple reason that not everyone can or will change their perspective or the letter of the philosophy. Diluting the argument even further come the 100th Monkey Brigade, who persuade us that we don't need to persuade everyone, only very few, then it all changes. And the activist becomes inactive because they actually don't know what they're campaigning for or against. There's always an active phase, but do remember that passive and neutral are equal partners in any evolving scenario, including your own sanity and peace of mind, and without them you are of no value to the kind of society you're campaigning for. I'm reminded of King Canute, and we were told that he tried to hold back the tides and was made to look foolish. In fact, he staged the holding back of the tides episode to illustrate what will happen if the reality of their political and economic situation at the time was not engaged, that the occupying power would simply wash over them, that the tide has turned and no man can hold it back. You can see why they taught you the watered-down version. Well, the tide has turned against those who run this world, and they know it. But their strength lays, as ever, in making sure that the people don't, lest they swim with it and wash away the ruptured power structures built of age. No longer need our weapons be the tongues of crying rage, though. We have knowledge, we have information, we have data. Do we have wisdom? It arises from those elements, but can we grasp it? I believe that we can and we must. The world is so complex that we couldn't begin to understand the geopolitical power structures nor the degrees to which they influence a million input factors in an equation which has no solution, just a whole load of results. So we must not consider them. Rather, we've got to step back and realize that however complex, ruthless, wealthy and powerful this enemy is, it requires energy. The productive worker units of the world provide that energy through their labour and their time, transmuted into money and traded among the wealthy as a resource to be utilised just like any other. The energy and resource of the planet is mined by those workers too, for the benefit of the same money issuers. We work, they play. They call it the serious game. This would be because they know the consequences of being caught out at it. But they have been, and it's there for all to see. Someone is issuing our currency as a debt-based, interest-bearing liability. Tomorrow it could be issued debt and interest-free. Why would anyone not want that? Well, there's only two answers to that question. First, because you issue the currency and profit from it, or because nobody told you about the scam. It's a bit hard to believe that all those people you regarded as intelligent over the years would not have seen this had it been true. So most dismiss it, even though the moment they look, they can see. But that's why they don't. It's only ever a personal choice. You can remain ignorant for fear of changing your own mind about something, or you can embrace the realities and dismiss that which doesn't stand up to personal scrutiny, and then stand in your own light. If, however, you have a faith-based religion, for example, every ounce of your indoctrinated soul is going to resist knowledge. This is provable even at a childish level in Christianity, whereby, if you were to ask a devout Christian if Jesus was actually a Jew, they might be offended at such a ridiculous notion. Yet, has that ever really been in doubt? I mean, was he not a Jew? Did he not preach Old Testament Judaism? Did I miss something? No, that's right, they did. And if you think about it, it becomes obvious that they've chosen to be ignorant rather than seek the facts and the knowledge, even when staring them in the face. They have to. They had no choice but to make the choice, so it's pointless telling them, because they can listen, though they can't hear. We're responsible for our own minds, and they're all welcome to theirs. But have you noticed how for centuries the occult has been demonized as bad, while the religious fight among themselves like creatures from the pits of Satan's arse? And we all know the story about how they murdered those with a more true nature-based understanding of reality. Have you noticed how they all still do? Yet their institutions and belief systems created the very structures which cause all the evil. It's only those we loosely term the occultists who ever challenge these bloodthirsty psychopaths, so much so that they had to stage their own challenge and create a Protestant wing too to pacify those who saw through their elitist deceptions. Luther was, of course, just as much a racist bigot as the rest of them, as any will see if they read The Diet of Worms and his rant about Jews and Catholics. If we get time in these shows, we may take a closer look at the establishment of Islam itself by the Roman Catholic Church. That's a whole subject in itself. I've talked much about the Jews and their role in history and current events, one of the longest holding conspiracy theories and one which gets discredited for even mentioning. Let's face it, this is what Hitler openly claimed, though he was often quite specific that he meant Jewish banking interests and Zionist globalists of his time. They just didn't tell you that bit at school. But if you read his speeches, which you can do nowadays, you'll learn more than they ever taught you. We're often told to wonder why it was that a nation of intelligent, hard-working and peace-loving people came to follow the man who turned out to be an Antichrist figure, the most evil man in history. They'll tell you that he deceived them and entranced them, whilst overlooking that this is exactly what they do to you. That is what politicians and media represent. But the reality is that he told them more truths than you've ever heard from our politicians, more solutions, not just words but actions and results. So they must convince us that this only happened because he printed money and everything was hunky-dory for a while, but then exploded because Hitler had collapsed the value of his currency. And this is just a lie, utter tosh, spun to keep those who don't, won't or can't look for themselves in the dark. And I say this as someone who has studied money and finance for decades as a profession, and because it's the most incredible scam, so easily seen by anyone who looks, that every effort, and I do mean every effort, is taken to ensure that people don't understand it. The words fiat currency have become synonymous with bad money in an awakening a truth movement, and I have to say, most of those I've met within the movement seem unaware of the basics, even though some of them are out there explaining the complexities to the students in the truth, freedom, and Freeman movements and communities. What do I mean? Well, I wouldn't mind betting that the majority of those who hear this, who are even interested in money at all, have come to understand that fiat currency is bad, and that it's created out of nothing and therefore has no real value. But I can tell you that this simply isn't true, though I am quite clear on why it appears to be true, and how it's been spun that way by those who would like to muddy these important waters. This is easy to do. They're murky to start with. And though I intend to do a show focusing solely upon money, I'd like today to recap a little on what I have said on previous shows, by way of consolidating the key points to provide a perspective upon money and other things, which I'll build upon in some detail in coming episodes. It would be only too easy at this point to launch into a description of money as debt and the dangers of a central bank, how economies are controlled, and how financiers, count them 50 round the table, white and dressed to kill, run your world. But the last 10 years have seen enough detail put out there for any who are truly interested to catch up to those realizations in no time should they wish to do so. I'd like to take a more philosophical approach tonight and explore just what money is and what it does. Most folk think that they know what that is. Some have even come to the realization that it's also a powerful sigil of occult origin. What listeners to this show need to realize is that this is literally true, but that this is a study in itself, one undertaken by many already, and whereas I agree with the detail of their analysis more often than not, I do find that many have conducted their study without ever paying attention to the nature of the money itself. An example would be one well-known commentator highlighting the evils of fiat currency, money from nothing, etc., whilst proposing a gold standard as a solution. And one has to be left wondering, what the fuck? Because he clearly has no insight into what fiat currency is and why that is exactly what we need. Let me explain. You may not believe it, but you're about to believe that fiat currency is good. Do you see how perceptions might change quickly? Yet the knowledge and the data hasn't changed, nor has the information available. Only understanding can change the perspective. Anything short of that is manipulation based upon misunderstanding, intentional or otherwise. People talk about things which they don't actually understand. No doubt someone would accuse me of the same, but we all stand judged by the validity of what we say, I guess. Not everyone cares about such things, though. Lying fills all our life. People pretend that they know all sorts of things, and every time they speak about something they do not know, as though they knew it, they lie, said Ouspensky. So, spouting an opinion is an invalid exercise unless it is at least researched and or validated by experience and or observation and measurement, the basics. I make an appeal to reason and rationality as a common theme in my shows, something which is so often overlooked in this movement. I've also expanded upon that and hope to make clear that reason and rationality, necessary though they are only part of the mindscape we must develop. To depend upon them alone and to cast aside the irrational and the artistic can only lead to disaster. There is a vast anti-arts monster seeking to suppress those who will speak out against the tyranny in a multitude of resonant ways. and we should expose it wherever we find it. Why do artistic people see the connections and express them so dangerously? Because that's what art is, an expression of creation and reality in all its forms. Such people are therefore dangerous, and the unartistic are the easiest to bait, because they're psychologically predisposed to not understand it. Art, music, words, and dance can entertain, influence, emote, and yes, even program emotional responses. There are two ways of looking at this fact. One would be to accept that this is indeed what artists seek to do at some level in whatever they do, unless it is purely for their own fulfillment, of course, which is in itself is a growth experience, character building and mind developing. A spiritual and intellectual journey via the irrational and the imagination. Irrational in mathematics just means it's infinite, never quite resolving, but definitive enough in three-dimensional reality for accurate geometry and measurement and construction. Pi is irrational. It goes on forever. Or does it? 3.141, etc. They don't know and never could. So it is irrational, as opposed to, say, 2.5, which is definitive and therefore irrational. Anyway, back to fiat currency, one which is based upon nothing, supposedly, and therefore has no virtue. It's heralded by many as one of the reasons we have financial chaos now, because there is no inherent value in our money, only that which we are led to believe and have confidence in. It requires the confidence of the people in the currency. Is this a bad thing? It is if we misunderstand something fundamental in the first place. First, though, let's look at non-fiat currency, one which is underwritten by gold or similar non-perishable metals, for example. Why is gold such a store of value? Many reasons, but ultimately all based upon one chemical reality. It will never corrode or lose its qualities, unless you dissolve it in a mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acid, and will therefore store value effectively forever. A currency which is underwritten by stocks of gold equivalent in value to the notes in issue can always be exchanged for that gold at any time. You'll therefore always have confidence that the note in your hand is worth, well, gold in the bush. Voila, simple and logical, fair, even, or so it would appear. But what if someone took that gold away and didn't tell you? Oops. Well, that's what they did. So they then thought it was better to come right out and give you a fiat currency, one based on your confidence only. And this is the Bradbury pound. That's one example in English history. As long as they can keep you confident, they can still rip you off until the day it must all come down around them. But then they'll give you the gold standard back. He who owns the gold controls all anyway, so a gold standard, noble though it may appear, is just the initial tool that they use to buy you into their caring system to get your gold off you. Meanwhile, you have a fiat currency underwritten by nothing. Or that is what your community infiltrators, and for that read Jewish Zionists, would have you believe. It is true to an extent, but there is a greater truth to see. This is looking through the square window at the situation, but we need to now take a look through the round one too, to see if we can square the circle of understanding and then measure the width of a circle. Fiat money is not underwritten or secured by anything in principle and is therefore subject to erosion of value, that's inflation, as new money is imprinted or loaned into circulation. The theoretical security which underwrites such a currency is the value of the nation state, or more realistically in today's world, its credit rating. Do, of course, be aware that Standard & Poor's and the other credit rating agencies, which give the credit ratings to the nation states and the banks, are owned by the very banks that they rate. It is as corrupt as it can be without giving its secret to the public. We're often confused by the fact that there are industries of so-called professionals out there in finance and journalism and law being educated in this field. They would have blown the whistle on these financial bad boys and alerted the public to what is going on if any of it were more than just a conspiracy theory. And the answer is that some have. Not many, though. The reality is that they're all just trained within the box, and those who start to move outside it lose their careers or more. So the real ignorance lays in the vast majority of pseudo-journalists and commentators whose only goal is more prestige in their incestuous circles. To actually educate themselves in their subjects would be a step too far, if only because it's really unnecessary in their careers to actually understand much at all. These midwives to history put on their bloody robes daily, whilst they pretend that it is they who understand things and you who need to learn it from them. A privileged position in any society. Shame on its abusers. So, fiat money is derided, but it is exactly what we need. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean the corrupt version we have of it now. I mean a natural system of exchange which nature itself models for us to copy, and it isn't far removed from the existing structure we have now. Indeed, the current system pretends to be that which I'm trying to describe to you. The major flaw being that those who control it took that control by engineering their position in the power structure to be the only ones to issue that currency and to lend it to the nation states. That's we the people, at interest. The scam truly is that simple, and it's this simplicity which is obfuscated at every move by them. One could even say that their entire system, political, economic, educational, media and financial, is constructed in order to hide this simple fact. So easy to realize if one looks. And this is the chink in their armor.
I will be king, and you will be queen. Though nothing will drive them away, we can beat them just for one day. Oh, we can be heroes just for one day. And you, well, you can be mean. And I drink all the time. 'Cause we're lovers, that is a fact. Yes, we're lovers, and that is that. Though nothing will keep us together, we could steal time just for one day. We can be heroes forever and ever. What you say? I wish you could swim like the dolphins, like dolphins can swim. Though nothing will keep us together. We can beat them forever and ever. We can be heroes just for one day.
I said a few years ago that we, the people, need to pressure this enemy into exposing their soft underbelly, that they would do all sorts to avoid that happening, but that we must try. Well, we did try, and we did expose a chink, one which they can never cover up again. Now we must wedge it wide open and embed our sword in its belly and spill its entrails. But how do we do that? These shows are my way of explaining what I understand we can do, and to muster the people willing to do it. Much more on this in due course. So, which natural system provides a model around which any truly free and dynamic system of exchange could prosper and provide wealth for all instead of great wealth for less than 0.1% of the population? There are only two systems known in nature: closed systems and open systems. A closed system would be one which was completely separate from all else outside it. One could imagine a cell in a body with an impermeable wall being a closed system, but in reality it exchanges heat and chemicals with other things around it, so it is in fact an open system. It can draw upon and exchange energy with that which is around it, the greater living body and the environment. Heat leaks from Earth into space. It has to, or we would die. The ecosystem is therefore an open system too. Generally, natural systems require open system dynamics in order to work. Our financial system, though, is a closed one. This may seem difficult to comprehend because we all know that, for example, even a thought or a comment expressed at the right time in the right financial circles can have huge impacts upon the markets. They are influenced and affected by so many external factors that it seems counterintuitive to call it a closed system for that very reason. It clearly isn't really closed, but it is. It's closed because somebody, the central banks owned by certain powerful families named in last week's show, is printing, and I use that word loosely, our money, lending it to us at interest, securing the loan with the assets of the UK or your own country, which they never give back because the loans are never repaid. Why? It's mathematically impossible to repay them all. They don't issue enough money into circulation to permit that, so eventually all collapses. All is repossessed. And note that word, incidentally, repossessed, implies that the lender possessed it before the owner. Go ponder. And all is owned by those who lend the money. Here's the killer, though. We've all been taught to see money as something which some have and others don't, and that this is the way it must be. It is therefore logical for us to conclude, however unfair we may think it is, that we have no choice but to borrow money from those who have it. There's nowhere else to get it from. And indeed there's not, because their system is closed to you. It must die like a cell, which can't communicate with the greater body, once it has eaten away that body like a cancer. Yes, they model their financial system on cancer, the opposite of a natural open system, one which must eat the greater body, feast upon it, and only then will it die. When it does, they have all. We have the scraps, because they still need our labour for now, and they introduce yet another strain of cancer, not quite so obviously virulent as the one that they just sucked us with, but it's theirs nonetheless. People will be happy to have anything by that time, and will readily see a new gold standard as the best we can do, again. But those who own the gold own all else, particularly if the value of your notes are linked to it. Do you see? And so, the solution dictated by natural law, for as long as we feel we need a means of exchange at all, is to establish an open system of finance, one which grows dynamically and shrinks when it needs to, a bit like the chest cavity on a breathing animal. Constant growth is simply cancer. That's what cancer is. Yet we have been trained to believe that if we aren't growing, we are stagnating. True though that might be in a world where everything else keeps growing because of the same indoctrination, it's the death of natural wealth, life, resources, and the death of man too. I'll explain in detail in a show on money soon. The other thing we need to do is issue our own currency, debt-free and as a fiat credit note. And to those that say that this is inflationary and doesn't work, I say you're either ignorant or you're a liar. Those who deflect this issue into murky waters of semantics and politics work intentionally to make the obvious look less obvious to you. It is non-political, and it's only ever made to appear to be so because the public have been trained not to understand the simplicity of the scam. If they actually do see it, they can't believe it, so they assume that they just misunderstood and they go back to the soap opera. This fiat credit note issued by the people themselves is to be underwritten by the labour, the goods, the services and the inherent value in the warehouse of the state. That's a term used by Joseph P. Farrell, author and financial researcher, which I think is the best way of summing up that which we must use to underwrite currency, the warehouse of the state, the nation, the people. Let's not get caught up right now in the semantics of those words. Choose your own. Because here's the catch, which is so readily used by those who seek to discredit such a system. Notice that in an open system, you would be an individual worker unit working for the benefit of the state. This, at first sight, is no different from communism, many other systems like that. But opposites often look the same. Indeed, they even merge on a Mobius strip, so don't let the magicians fool you. What they must cause you to miss is that in an open system, all the wealth goes to the people, their state, thereby increasing the value of that state in real terms and resources. This in turn allows more currency to be issued against that real value, natural growth, and a system which can breathe and absorb the natural fluctuations in its biorhythms. Credit. If you think about it, the people and their work is the only real value in any society. This is, of course, why this criminal cabal has taken ownership of it whilst telling you we all have to work or die. What they don't tell you is that we work for ourselves and cut them out of the equation in an ideal world. Then the cancer will die. I suggest that if we don't do this by peaceful, intelligent and non-political means, we're going to have to operate and cut out that cancer by physical intervention, just like they do to the human body. It's not a nice choice, but it's a choice that we're going to have to make in our lifetimes. The other choice would be to betray your children and grandchildren. That's the choice most will make. I don't doubt it. Not least those midwives to history. Most already have sold their kids, and the people so short that I don't imagine they're likely to do a U-turn unless they're perhaps purged and shamed one day. If our media could become an open system, not a controlled closed one, can you imagine what might happen? Am I just using emotive words when I speak of betrayal of our children and such things? No. By not taking this fight on, we betray all future generations by trading their wealth and health for our self-serving ignorance. The old adage about, Dad, what did you do when all this was happening, will apply. So, whereas we may not win the war against them, we will leave a beacon to history showing that we did try, if only to encourage them to keep resisting. But I believe we can and will win that war. What we must do is actually try and be seen to be doing so, openly and with no apologies to anyone. It isn't possible to battle the huge media and financial interests in our enslavement because we are the source of their wealth. We simply need to become the source of our own wealth and cease giving it to them. Then watch them quiver. I recommend to everyone to watch a film called The Big Short about the financial collapse and understand the simplicity of it all and the greed. Understand what it means though, because it's not been put right. A new breed of trading, high-speed trading, is the modern equivalent of Rothschild's pigeon. Only it's as fast as light almost, and a new monster called bespoke tranche opportunities are about to be used against you. And to all labour union leaders out there, you battle the corporations and fight for the interests of the workers, yet you seem to overlook the fact that if we issue our own currency, it is the broad spectrum of workers who will prosper beyond anything. And you don't even need to be political about demanding it. Just brave, I know. They did kill one of your own for venturing in that direction. Surely it's time for someone to be brave enough, though. You have the platform. We, the people, don't. So are we going to have to create our own? If you've heard the last 3 shows, you'll know that I've focused on these 3 core subjects. Think of them as 3 primary colours from which the rest of the spectrum can be seen when merged in various combinations. These shows and the subjects covered within them could lead someone to the realization that the entirety of history, religious and political, sums to 0. But it doesn't. It's rich in the individual souls who are cast in their times into this passion play we call the human condition. And what we seek today has always been sought by those with the resources to find it in the past. This comes to power and the enslavement of the worker units via capitalism, communism, various other fronts that these pharaohs, that's the church and the Templar financial wizards, use. They work together with the Kabbalistic priesthood. That's the Merovingian angelic bloodline of the pharaoh, a line which includes the Rothschilds, the Red Shield line symbolized by the Red Knight in Arthurian and Grail legends. This, of course, is Josephus, Saul in the Grail and Arthurian literature too. These people are creating not only a passion play, but a divine comedy. And I'll leave you now with another song by the man who saw through that comedy and has tried to tell you about it. This one is called I Can't Give Everything Away. And this song is the last one on the album, so it represents the last words that David Bowie ever consigned to recording, unless, of course, there's something else to come out. Anyway, until the next show, in 2 weeks' time, thank you for listening. This one was slightly different, intentionally, although there have been a few hurdles to overcome as well. So please do join us again in a couple of weeks, when I'll be taking a look for the first time, quite specifically, at the prime number cross and some of its implications. God bless you, David.
Something's very wrong. The post returns for prodigal sons, with blackouts, hearts, with flowered news, with skull designs upon my shoes. I can't give everything. I can't give everything. Saying no, but meaning yes. This is all I ever meant. That's the message that I sent. I can't give everything. I can't give everything. The pulse returns to prodigal sons, with blackouts hearts, with flowered news, with skull designs upon my shoes. I can't give everything. I can't give everything.
A starman fell to earth one day, took the roundhouse on. The spider with the platinum hair at his side, and a message in his song. So stiff on his legend, could turn a lad insane, but turned a lot of space boys on who never would be the same. And Mr. Jones says nothing at all. He sold the world from under your feet, but that's hunky-dory, they say. With only 5 years left to live, Aladdin hit LA. He was bitten by the savage jaw of 1984. Got thin, got loaded, but the space boys cried out for more. And Mr. Jones said nothing at all. The Philly dogs turned to soul, and the European cannon rolled through Warsaw to Berlin, where lovers called across the wall. Lodgers in a strange place, strangers in a strange land, putting scary monsters to rest, dancing under the moonlight in blue jeans. Never let us down. And Mr. Jones said nothing at all. Mr. Jones said nothing at all.